Chapter 16: Shadows and Sacrifice. Zeke's world slowed to a crawl. He watched Kara lunge at Delan, their bodies colliding in a blur of violence. Soldiers raised their weapons but hesitated, unsure of what to do, as their leader was embroiled in a close-quarters struggle. Zeke's instincts screamed at him to move. Without thinking, he dove behind a crate, pulling his pistol free and firing at the soldiers. Shots ricocheted off the metal walls, sending sparks flying as chaos erupted. Kara and Delan crashed to the ground, the knife glinting in the dim light as they grappled for control. Delan's strength was surprising, and his face twisted in rage as he fought to overpower Kara. But Kara wasn't weak. Her muscles tensed as she twisted her body, using her momentum to knock Delan off balance. The knife slipped from his hand, clattering across the floor. "Zeke!" Kara shouted through gritted teeth, still locked in combat. Zeke scrambled from behind the crate, dodging incoming fire as he made his way toward her. He slid across the floor, grabbing the knife just as Delan's hand reached for it. With a surge of adrenaline, Zeke stabbed the blade into the ground, driving it into Delan's wrist, pinning him down. Delan let out a strangled cry of pain, his grip faltering. But the momentary victory was short-lived. The soldiers, recovering from their confusion, trained their rifles on Zeke and Kara. They were surrounded, and there was no way out. "Drop the weapon!" one of the soldiers barked, his voice cold and mechanical through his helmet. Zeke's heart pounded as he looked at Kara. Her eyes met his, a silent understanding passing between them. They were out of options. But before either of them could move, a deafening explosion rocked the warehouse. The walls trembled, and the ceiling groaned as debris rained down from above. Zeke shielded his face as a cloud of dust and smoke filled the room, obscuring everything. Through the chaos, Zeke heard the sounds of combat outside, gunfire, shouting, and the unmistakable roar of a transport vehicle's engine. The rebellion had arrived. Kara seized the moment of confusion, elbowing Delan in the face before leaping to her feet. Zeke followed, pulling the knife free from the ground. They sprinted toward the nearest exit as the soldiers were caught off guard by the sudden assault from outside. They burst through the door into the open air, the night sky lit up by muzzle flashes and explosions. Rebel forces were engaging Delan's troops in a fierce battle, the sound of gunfire echoing across the industrial district. Smoke billowed from the transport vehicles that had been parked outside the warehouse, and the heavy thud of mortars shook the ground. Zeke and Kara ducked behind a burning vehicle, catching their breath. "Did you know the rebels were coming?" Zeke asked, his voice breathless. Kara shook her head, wiping the sweat and grime from her brow. "No, this wasn't part of the plan." Zeke glanced around, trying to get a sense of the battlefield. The rebels had caught Delan's forces off guard, but the commander's soldiers were regrouping quickly. They wouldn't hold for long. In the distance, Zeke spotted a familiar figure, tall and imposing, directing the rebel attack. It was Arden, their old ally, the one Zeke had feared was lost to Delan's influence. It seemed Arden hadn't turned after all. "Kara, we need to get to Arden," Zeke said, pointing toward the distant figure. "He can help us get out of here." Kara nodded, but Zeke could see the doubt in her eyes. "Zeke, She hesitated, the words sticking in her throat. Before she could finish, another explosion rocked the ground, and they were thrown off balance. "Move!" Zeke shouted, pulling her to her feet. They weaved through the chaos, dodging gunfire and leaping over debris as they made their way toward Arden. Zeke's heart raced, not just from the danger, but from the uncertainty of what would happen next. Could they trust Arden? Could they trust anyone now? As they reached Arden's position, the rebel leader turned, his eyes widening in surprise as he saw them approach. "Zeke! Kara!" he called out, his voice barely audible over the cacophony of battle. "What the hell are you doing here?" Zeke didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Dylan's inside. We have to stop him before he can escape." Arden's jaw clenched, his gaze flickering to the warehouse behind them. He's not getting away this time. But just as Arden gave the order to advance on the warehouse, a squad of Dellen's elite soldiers appeared from the shadows, cutting off their path. They were heavily armored and armed with advanced weaponry, their presence sending a chill down Zeke's spine. "We can't fight them head-on," Kara muttered, her eyes scanning the area for cover. Zeke's mind raced, trying to come up with a plan, but before he could speak, one of the elite soldiers stepped forward. He removed his helmet, revealing a familiar face. It was Keenan, one of Zeke's closest friends from their early days in the rebellion. Zeke's heart sank. "Keenan!" Keenan's expression was cold, devoid of the warmth Zeke remembered. "It didn't have to be this way, Zeke. You should have joined us." Zeke took a step forward, his voice thick with disbelief. "Keenan, you were always the one who said we had to fight for something bigger than ourselves. What happened to you?" Keenan's jaw tightened. "I saw the truth, Zeke. Concord isn't the enemy. It's the only thing keeping this city from tearing itself apart. Dylan has the vision, the strength to lead. You should have listened to me." Kara tensed beside Zeke, her hand inching toward her weapon. Zeke, however, held up a hand, silently urging her to stop. This wasn't about Dylan or the rebellion anymore. This was about friendship, what was left of it. "Keenan, you know this isn't right," Zeke said, his voice steady. "Dylan doesn't care about the city. He cares about control. He's using people like you, like all of us, to feed his own ambition." Keenan's eyes flickered with something, doubt maybe. But then his face hardened again. "It's too late for that, Zeke. You made your choice. And now you have to live with the consequences." With that, Keenan raised his weapon, aiming directly at Zeke. Time seemed to freeze as Zeke stared down the barrel of his old friend's rifle. There was a flicker of regret in Keenan's eyes, but it was buried beneath layers of loyalty to Dellen, of betrayal and twisted ideals. Zeke's hand hovered over his own gun, but he knew what pulling the trigger would mean. It would be the end of whatever bond they'd once shared, the final line crossed. "Keenan, please," Zeke said quietly, his voice strained with emotion. "You don't have to do this." For a long moment, Keenan stood there, his finger resting on the trigger. And then, in a split second, everything changed. There was a gunshot, and Zeke flinched, expecting the worst. But when he looked up, Keenan wasn't standing anymore. He had collapsed to the ground, blood pooling beneath him. Kara stood beside Zeke, her pistol still raised, smoke curling from the barrel. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling. Zeke's breath caught in his throat. His friend, his brother in arms, was dead. But there was no time to grieve. Dylan's forces were closing in, and they still had to stop him before it was too late. "Come on," Zeke said, his voice hollow. "We have to finish this."